Medieval fashion wasn't about looking good. It was about survival, status, and sometimes pure absurdity. This isn't your average historical fashion show. We're diving deep into the uncomfortable, impractical, and downright dangerous trends that defined an era where comfort was practically a foreign concept. The Middle Ages, when we imagine them, often come draped in a haze of chain mail, long robes, jeweled crowns, and peasants in simple wool. Yet beneath the surface, fashion was never just fabric. It was a cipher, a language, and at times a weapon. Clothing was not chosen for comfort, nor for convenience, but as a mark of survival and rank, of piety and power. Every hemline, every stitch, every extravagant sleeve spoke to something deeper, sometimes absurd, sometimes dangerous, and often unsettlingly symbolic. Consider the shoes, those infamous polanes, long pointed slippers so exaggerated that their curled tips had to be tied to the knees with chains just to keep the wearer from tripping. These shoes were not designed for walking through mud or cobblestones. They were statements, flamboyant signals of rank. To wear such absurdity was to announce that you lived above the need for practicality. Some accounts suggest these shoes became so dangerously long that laws had to intervene, curbing their excess, with kings decreeing how many inches of pointed leather a man could wear based on his social standing. Was this merely fashion, or was it a coded form of social control? Because here lies the deeper question: why would entire societies submit to clothing that restricted their movement, endangered their health, and weighed them down? Was fashion simply vanity, or was it something far more deliberate? Take, for example, women's gowns in the late Middle Ages, often made with sleeves so heavy and trailing that they dragged in the dirt and required attendants to carry them. Or the corsetry that would later evolve, binding the body into rigid, unnatural shapes. These garments reshaped not just the figure, but the very experience of being alive, of breathing, of moving. They created boundaries around the body, physical, social, and symbolic. Yet, when we look closer, whispers emerge of something hidden, an unspoken knowledge embedded within fabric itself. In monasteries, where scribes copied forbidden texts by candlelight, records mention patterns woven into robes that carried protective meaning, geometric designs believed to guard against disease or evil spirits. These were not just decorations, but remnants of an older language, an echo of sacred geometry, perhaps stretching back to forgotten civilizations that understood patterns as more than art, as mathematics with spiritual weight. The peasants' coarse wool tunic, often dismissed as mere poverty's uniform, was itself a survival tool. Wool absorbed water, kept out the cold, and could last for years. Its scratchiness was tolerated because it endured, but some accounts hint that its natural lanolin content even helped protect against parasites. Could it be that what looks uncomfortable to us was part of an older, pragmatic knowledge of living within harsh climates? But beyond practicality, clothing was also surveillance. Laws known as sumptuary codes dictated exactly who could wear what: velvet for nobles, fur for the wealthy, and plain colors for peasants. These were not just rules of style, but rules of power, keeping social hierarchies visibly intact at every glance. Imagine walking through a medieval city square. You could tell at once who was untouchable and who was expendable simply by the cut of their cloth. Clothing was control, woven into every thread. And here, a darker speculation lingers. In the very structure of medieval garments, those restrictive bodices, the choking collars, the stiff doublets, was there something intentional? Were bodies being trained, constrained, conditioned into submission not just socially, but psychologically? Scholars of medieval symbology note the parallels between fashion and architecture of the same era. Just as cathedrals lifted stone impossibly high, demanding the body to crane upward in awe, so too did clothing lift, bind, and burden, reminding the wearer of their place. Clothing was a cathedral worn on the skin, but there is also the enigma of forgotten materials. Fragments found in burial sites suggest textiles we do not fully understand. Fabrics treated with dyes whose chemical formulas remain elusive. In some cases, cloth has survived centuries longer than it should have, hinting at lost methods of preservation. What recipes? What alchemical formulas? What forbidden techniques were woven into medieval wardrobes and later lost to time? Fashion, in this light, becomes more than absurd shoes or suffocating gowns. It becomes a coded archive of a worldview, one where comfort was sacrificed for meaning, where survival was wrapped in wool, where geometry stitched into hems whispered of protection, and where the absurdity of clothing was perhaps the point, a constant reminder that the body itself was not free. When we think of medieval fashion as absurd, it's tempting to laugh at the pointy shoes, the oversized sleeves, the stiff collars. Yet, beneath the humor lies a far stranger reality. Fashion was not only about outward display, but also about transforming the inner life of its wearer. Garments shaped posture, dictated gesture, even altered thought. To live in certain clothes was to inhabit a different body altogether, a body that belonged less to the self and more to the system that clothed it. Imagine a knight preparing for court. His doublet, tightly padded and laced, forced his chest forward and shoulders back, an artificial confidence stitched into every seam. His hose, pulled taut, restricted movement, making the act of walking a slow, deliberate performance. None of this was comfortable, nor was it meant to be. It was a ritual. By wearing such garments, he became an emblem, less a man than a symbol, an extension of hierarchy. But what happens when we peel back the layers of fabric and look for what was deliberately hidden? In the archives of forgotten monasteries, there are mentions of garments woven with hidden pockets, sewn not for utility, but for secrecy. Some chroniclers describe pilgrims who carried relic fragments, forbidden charms, or even coded scraps of parchment hidden within their robes. In a world where the possession of certain texts could mean death, clothing became a clandestine vault. Could medieval garments have been vehicles for preserving knowledge, smuggling forbidden truths across borders under the guise of fabric? And then there is the matter of dyes. The medieval obsession with color was not mere aesthetics. To wear scarlet was to invoke blood, power, and sacrifice. To wear deep blue was to channel the heavens, the divine. But the recipes for these colors, lapis, ground into powder, insects crushed into pigment, plants steeped in secret brews, were themselves guarded knowledge. The great cloth guilds kept their methods hidden, treating them as sacred. Some historians even speculate that the formulas for certain dyes were purposefully erased from record, suppressed when trade routes shifted or when church authorities feared their associations with pagan rites. If true, then medieval fashion carries within it the ghost of alchemy. Every robe and cloak a spell in wool and silk, every hue a coded resonance. Yet not all fashion was sanctioned. In the shadows of cities like Florence, London, or Lubeck, there were subcultures, young men called fashion rebels, who slashed their sleeves open to reveal inner linings, defying authority by flaunting extravagance. City councils banned such displays, calling them indecent. Why? Because these cuts were not just aesthetic, they were an act of defiance, a refusal to be bound by the rigid codes of class. In the tension between the official wardrobe of power and the rebellious dress of youth, we glimpse the unending struggle between conformity and individuality. But rebellion had a cost. Chroniclers wrote of punishments for those who dressed above their station, fines, confiscations, public shaming. In some towns, even imprisonment. Clothing was never a neutral choice. It was a battlefield where one's very identity could be policed and punished. And here, another possibility arises. If fashion could control society so effectively, Could it also have been used as an instrument of deeper manipulation? Consider the idea of resonance, that certain patterns and cuts, certain materials, carry subtle psychological or even physiological effects. Ancient cultures believed in sympathetic magic, that symbols could shape reality. Could the binding of a bodice, the constriction of a collar, the ritual repetition of lacing and unlacing, have reinforced submission not just socially, but subconsciously? Were medieval people, knowingly or unknowingly, dressing themselves into obedience? There are artifacts that seem to hint at more. In a Prague museum rests a fragment of embroidered cloth, stitched with repeating geometric motifs uncannily close to diagrams found in medieval occult manuscripts. The resemblance is too strong to ignore. Was this simply fashion, or was it a hidden transmission of forbidden geometry, encoded in the very clothing of an age? And if so, who placed it there? The guild artisan? The noble who commissioned it? Or an older current of knowledge, flowing silently beneath the visible order of medieval life? Even the headdresses of women, towering hennons, starched veils, and elaborate wimples, become uncanny under scrutiny. These were not practical, nor even beautiful by modern standards. They were burdens, weights worn on the skull, restricting vision, forcing the neck into rigidity. Why endure such absurd discomfort? Some scholars suggest these structures mirrored cosmological ideas, the hennon's taper echoing the spire of a cathedral, lifting the gaze heavenward. If so, then medieval women carried architecture on their heads, bearing the cosmos as part of their daily attire. The body became a living building, fashioned the scaffolding of metaphysics. And yet, what did all this discomfort achieve? It forged resilience. To endure stiff collars, sodden wool, and suffocating layers was to train oneself in hardship. Comfort was not an option, because hardship was the expected condition of life. Fashion itself was a ritual rehearsal of suffering, preparing bodies for the weight of disease, famine, war, and the crushing hierarchies of the age. But as we sift through these remnants, garments rotted in graves, fragments preserved in cathedral treasuries, manuscripts with cryptic notes, we encounter the tantalizing possibility that what we call fashion was never merely decorative. It was a system of symbols, a language of power, an archive of hidden geometries, and perhaps even a weaponized form of discipline. The absurdity, then, was not random. It was deliberate, and in its deliberate discomfort, it concealed the truth. The body itself was never meant to be free. If medieval fashion teaches us anything, it is that clothing was never neutral. Each thread carried meaning. Each fold carried weight. Each absence of comfort spoke louder than silk or velvet ever could. What we dismiss as absurd shoes or suffocating gowns may, in truth, be the surviving fragments of a philosophy that placed symbolism above self, hierarchy above ease, and ritual above personal comfort. But why? Why would people embrace garments that scrape their skin, bruise their ribs, or trip their feet? Was it vanity, a simple hunger for beauty? Or was it something older, darker, deeper, an understanding that the body itself was clay to be shaped, bound, and trained? The evidence suggests more than vanity. In royal courts, garments acted as armor, not against steel, but against invisibility. To wear gold-threaded brocade was to declare one's place in a cosmic hierarchy, to participate in the theater of divine order. To endure discomfort was to embody endurance, to transform suffering into spectacle. In monasteries, robes carried silence. Monks wore wool not because it was comfortable, but because its roughness reminded them of humility, of penance. Some even wore hair shirts beneath their robes, garments designed to scratch and irritate the skin relentlessly, a private ritual of discomfort meant to keep the mind fixed on God. Fashion, here, became a tool of spiritual engineering, and yet, woven through all of this austerity, hints of something stranger remain. In the margins of manuscripts like the Codex Manesse or the Illustrated Book of Hours, we find depictions of garments with impossible colors, fabrics shining with an iridescence no medieval dye could achieve. Were these simply artistic exaggerations, or records of textiles made with techniques now lost to us? Could guild secrets, once passed through whispers and locked workshops, have guarded formulas capable of creating hues we can no longer reproduce? If so, then medieval fashion was also an archive of suppressed technologies. Think of the burial finds where garments, buried in damp soil, emerged centuries later with patterns still intact. Why has this cloth survived when logic says it should? Have rotted? What chemicals were worked into the dye vats? What plant mixtures steeped into fibers? What knowledge erased from our histories? The silence of these fabrics is as loud as the missing pages of forbidden books, and perhaps most unsettling of all, when fashion encodes geometry, when garments mimic cathedrals, when sleeves echo arches and pennons echo spires, are we witnessing a forgotten understanding of the body as a temple, a structure to be shaped in alignment with cosmic law? If so, then medieval clothing was not mere absurdity, but a living architecture, binding the wearer to a system larger than themselves. A system in which freedom of comfort, freedom of body, and freedom of choice were sacrificed to maintain an order deemed higher, holier, or perhaps more sinister. Today, when we dress in fabrics that prize comfort, elastic, breathable, synthetic, we inherit a rejection of this philosophy. But do not mistake rejection for superiority. Comfort is its own kind of prison, one in which meaning dissolves into convenience. In contrast, medieval fashion, however absurd, however punishing, whispered a different truth, that to be human was to carry weight, to be bound in ritual, to endure discomfort as a form of belonging. And so, the absurdity of the past becomes a mirror for us. For when we laugh at long shoes or spiked collars, we forget that our own age is no less enslaved to fashion, only in subtler ways. What is fast fashion but its own form of obedience? What is brand loyalty but a sumptuary law we impose upon ourselves? Comfort has not freed us. It has simply disguised the chains. The Middle Ages knew no such disguises. They wore their chains openly, stitched into fabric, displayed upon the body, announced in every sleeve, collar, and shoe. And in this, they left us a haunting legacy, the reminder that what we wear is never innocent. Clothing is control, fashion is philosophy, and comfort, in the medieval world, was never part of the equation. If you found this journey into the hidden truths of medieval fashion thought-provoking, let the conversation continue. Like this video, share it with others who wonder about the past, and subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries history tried to silence.